Minister, Deputies, Councillors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much to Donal for the introduction. Thank you very much to Joe for the invitation to come here. I am ashamed to say this is the first McGill summer school that I have attended, but I have followed with great interest the proceedings of the school from afar, and it's been a constant light in the sky, the new ideas, the engagement with things that are important for this country, this island, and for Europe. So, real pleasure to be here and to share some thoughts with you about health policy. And the first thing I have to say is that it really is a very exciting time in health policy. And why is that? For the first time in my lifetime, an Irish government has signed up to the social democratic values that underpin the health systems of Europe. And those are universality, equity and solidarity. Big words maybe, but I'll try and explain a little bit about them as we work through. Our health system, for to believe the government, is to be reformed to provide access for all to medical care on the basis of need, not ability to pay. The funding model will change to a model of payment based on social solidarity. And applied to the health service, that means the healthy and the wealthy supporting the unhealthy and the unwealthy, both within generations and across generations. And this is a momentous change in Irish health policy, and I just want to really acknowledge that. The government has a welcome determination to remove two of the major inequalities that exist in accessing medical care in Ireland. The first inequality is the barriers to people on low incomes to accessing primary care, general practitioner and pharmacy care. These citizens, and they are citizens, must first demonstrate that they cannot, without undue hardship, think about it, undue hardship, they must suffer a little hardship before they can qualify. Undue hardship, they cannot, without undue hardship, pay for their or their dependents' medical care. This, I suggest, is a humiliating process for those who have to apply or reapply, as they do, most people do, for a medical card. But even worse are the people whose incomes fall just above the guidelines for a medical card, for whom a visit to a general practitioner and a prescription for a sick child can be prohibitively expensive. This, believe it or not, this barrier to accessing primary care goes back directly to the Poor Law of the mid-19th century and is one issue which successive governments of this republic have either been unwilling or unable to change. There is an equally strong commitment by this government to end the two-tier access to hospital care, whereby those with the ability to pay can skip the queue for diagnosis and treatment in our public hospitals, while those without insurance have to wait their turn. It appears from what the government has said that our infatuation with Boston may be ending and that we are hopefully fixing our sights on Berlin. From their very different political standpoints, both Labour, first Labour and then Fine Gael, came to the conclusion that the only way to fix the health service... Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah, good, okay. Thanks, Joe. I'll speak a bit closer. From their different political standpoints, first the Labour Party and then Fine Gael, came to the conclusion that the only way to fix the health service was to replace the centrally taxed funded arrangement with a funding model based on universal health insurance. Crucially, the programme for government states that as a statutory system of health insurance guaranteed by the state, the universal health insurance will not be subject to European or national competition law. In this manner, the government is dispatching one of the shibboleths of Irish policy that has done enormous harm, that we are required to have a market in health insurance in Ireland. The universal health insurance system, and if you forgive me, I'll just give you a little flavour of what is in the programme for government, because I'm not sure people are fully aware of just how radical these changes are. The universal health insurance system is to be introduced gradually, beginning with access to primary, general practitioner and pharmacy care, and then extending to hospital services in the next, that assuming, of course, that the government will be re-elected. The commitment is to extend, within the first year of office, access to primary care, which means the removal of GP fees, to those claimants of free drugs under the long-term illness scheme. That's going to cost about 17 million. In the second year of the government, the same access will be extended to those covered by the high-tech drug scheme. That's going to cost 15 million. And then in the next phase, and there's no year specified for this phase, subsidised access to primary care will be extended. And at some unspecified date, but presumably during the expected 5-year term of office of the government, access to care without fees will be extended to all. The cost of this is not specified in the programme. The phased introduction is justified on the grounds that it will allow for an increase in primary care professionals. It will allow for the negotiation of a new GP contract, and it will facilitate the introduction of universal primary care legislation. In relation to universal hospital care, the government commits to laying the groundwork for its introduction by 2016. The programme for government says that UHI, the shorthand for universal health insurance, will provide guaranteed access to care for all in public and private hospitals on the same basis as the privately insured have now. It will be compulsory for every person to be insured with a public or private insurer, with insurance payments related to ability to pay. Hospital insurance fund will be established to pay insurance premia for people on low incomes and subsidised premia for people on middle incomes. This hospital insurance fund will be responsible for ensuring community rating and risk equalisation between insurance companies and reimburse hospitals for services not covered by insurance, such as emergency departments and ambulance services. Under UHI, insurers will be obliged to offer the same package of services to all, and that package will be determined by the Minister for Health in consultation with the Hospital Insurance Fund and medical experts, and will be regularly reviewed in a process to be established in legislation, the Universal Health Insurance Act. Crucially, insurers will not be allowed to sell insurance giving faster access to procedures covered by the UHI package. Hospitals and clinics which participate in supplying care under UHI will not be allowed to sell faster access to procedures covered by the UHI package. The organisation of the health service, as a result, is going to look very different once UHI is introduced. The HSE is to be phased out with functions returned, and I put that word in inverted commas, to the Department of Health. Although apart from finance, these functions were never with the Department of Health, they were previously with the health boards, or transferred to other bodies. Hospitals are to become independent trusts with managers responsible to their boards. So the question is, will it work? I hope so, but it's not going to be easy. And I want to go on and suggest that even when UHI is in place, it won't be enough for a number of reasons. It's not going to be easy because UHI, as proposed by the government, is based on certain assumptions that may not be correct, and because it will threaten interests that do very well from the current status quo. The main assumption made in the programme is that one can give the whole population access to hospital services on the same basis as those with private insurance enjoy now. While UHI will, of course, change the financial incentives to hospitals and encourage them to treat more patients, money following the patient, our very low ratio of beds, of specialists, of hospital beds and medical technology per head of population means that it's not going to be possible to treat the whole population, and remember it's growing and it's ageing and medical expertise is advancing all the time. It's not going to be possible to treat the whole population with the promptness that those currently insured expect. Not that is without a major investment of resources. And that's one reason why insurance-funded systems tend to use a higher share of gross domestic product than tax-funded systems, because in tax-funded systems it's easier to ration services. There is also an assumption that UHI will lead to a fairer system than under a tax-funded system, the tax-funded system we have now. I challenge that. The Danes, the Swedes, the Nordic model, the Finns, the Norwegians, the British, and our fellow countrymen and women across the other side of the border have tax-funded health systems that have equitable access to services. As our chairman said, the waiting times may be as long, but everybody waits. It's not just the poor and those on low income who wait. The point is that they have ensured that the principle of universality and equitable access is enshrined in the way their health services operate, and they look to their political leaders to protect it. We have done the opposite in this country. From the mid-1950s to the late 1970s, we had equitable access to hospital services, but we allowed that principle to be undermined by the consultant contract of 1979, which gave consultants almost unlimited rights to private practice in public hospitals, by tax reliefs on health insurance premia that made them very tax efficient. If you recall, we were all paying very high levels of tax in the 1970s and 80s. By heavily subsidising insurance premia by a policy of marginal costing of hospital care, and by political leaders who encouraged people to take out health insurance in the late 1980s, particularly the middle classes, to avoid the worst effects of the cutbacks in the health service. And also, I'd suggest, by failing to challenge the notion that you won't get high-quality medical care without actually paying your doctor. Is there any guarantee that we won't undermine a universal health insurance system in the same way? As the Harvard health economist, Professor William Hsiao, has commented, the primary decision in the development of a national healthcare system is a moral one. Your ethics, your sense of justice, determine how you distribute goods and services, including healthcare. So the first question has to deal with a country's ethical values. So the introduction of UHI without a significant expansion of hospital and specialist services will mean that people who currently have speedy access to care may have to wait longer. How will they react to UHI? Barry Andrews, the Fianna Fáil health spokesman, commented before the last election that people liked our two-tier health system. Mr. Andrews may have lost his seat, but his comments contain a warning to the government. There are people, perhaps too many people, who like our current unfair, inequitable and dysfunctional system. There are people who believe there is nothing unfair in jumping the queue for access to hospital care because they have insurance. And there are people who make a lot of money from the current system. One newspaper report reported that between the 2,200 hospital specialists, for example, in addition to the 500 million that they earn in salaries, they also take home something of the order of 400 million in fees for treating insured patients under the present arrangements. That's a very tidy sum of money to protect as you enter into negotiations on a new model. And by the way, the programme for government and the two party manifestos do not face up to this issue of how our specialists be paid under UHI. Changing the health system in the way that the government proposes is not going to be easy. We can look to our own history of opposition to widening access to health service to get a sense of where that opposition may come from. The inter-party and Fianna Fáil governments of the late 1940s and 1950s faced the combined opposition of the medical profession and the Catholic hierarchy in their attempts to introduce free services for mothers and children, mother and child affair, and to extend hospital and specialist services to those on middle incomes. The ghosts of that opposition were only finally laid to rest by the Taoiseach in his speech in the Dáil last week. The organised medical profession extracted a very high price in the late 1970s for the extension of hospital and specialist coverage to the whole population in the form of a contract which allowed the current two-tier system to develop. The previous government, with its exaggerated belief in the efficiency of the market, encouraged by tax reliefs and other means for profit and shareholder-driven hospitals and insurance companies to open for the first time in this country. Will they perceive the government's plans to change the funding model for medical care as an opportunity or a threat? What will they make of the statement that competition rules will not apply to universal health insurance? The fierce and often irrational opposition in the United States to President Obama's limited reform of the United States health insurance market, led by the profit-driven health insurance companies and tapping into a right-wing agenda opposed to government intervention in principle, suggests the outlines of possible opposition here. And as the Minister knows, another major challenge in medicine, they say the acute drives out the chronic. The Minister has a huge agenda in simply leading the current health services, and to actually find the time to develop and introduce a new model of the health system is going to be an enormous challenge. The government will also face the challenges of all reformers, that people who feel threatened by change are much more strongly motivated to resist it than those who will at a future time benefit from the change are motivated to fight for those changes. Can the government prevent a coalition of interest forming between the disgruntled middle classes who will lose their fast-track access to hospital care, the organised medical profession who want to protect their very high incomes, and profit-driven health companies who fear loss of profits under new arrangements, to oppose their plans for a fairer health service? If it can't prevent such a coalition of interests, will it be able to overcome the combined resistance? I suggest it will be perhaps one of the greatest tests of political leadership in reforming this republic. I'd also like to suggest that UHI is not enough. Why is that? The introduction of UHI, if done well, will bring Ireland to a point that most European countries reached more than a generation ago. We're a little slow in this department. It will address one aspect of health inequality, access to care on the basis of medical need, not ability to pay. But it won't address the much bigger issue of the unequal distribution of health in our society. It is now widely accepted that governments and health systems have a responsibility not simply to guarantee fair access to health care, but also to address the underlying social and economic inequalities that shorten the lives of poor people and burden their lives with more illness and disability. Ireland is now conspicuous for its lack of action to reduce these wider health inequalities. And disappointingly, there is no commitment to reducing health inequalities in the programme for government. The recent task report, Eliminating Health Inequalities, a Matter of Life and Death, asks us to imagine Ireland with the best health status in Europe, a country in which everyone, no matter what their income or social status, could expect to live a longer, healthier and more productive life. It refers to the evidence that the achievement of such an outcome is linked to how evenly wealth is distributed in a society. The more equal it is distributed, the better the health of that society. The good news is that in countries that take equality seriously, everyone enjoys better health, not just those on low incomes. The corollary is that achieving greater equity in health is a whole society challenge that requires adequate funding of and alignment of key policies, including tax, welfare, employment, education, policing, transport, housing, underpinned by social values that attach more importance to human development than short-term economic growth. Our recent record of funding public services is not encouraging. We have the distinction of having had the third lowest level of public spending in the period 1995-2008 in the OECD, and the lowest overall tax take in the same period among the 15 member states of the EU. Task argues that inequality is a preventable cause of death. The report draws attention to the evidence that where you live in Ireland and your social class has a significant impact on your health. Recent data from the CSO demonstrates the link between deprivation and life expectancy. It found that the affluence of the area in which you reside to be the strongest predictor of life expectancy. That was from the figures from the 2006 census. So men, what does that mean? It means men living in the poorest areas, such as in the Glenties, can expect to live just over 73 years, while their fellow citizens living in more affluent areas can expect to live another 4.5 years to 78 years of age. Women in the poorest areas can expect to die nearly 3 years earlier than women in the most affluent areas. The differences in life expectancy between social classes is equally stark. Male professional workers can expect to live 6 years longer than unskilled male workers. The differences for women is about 4 years. The link between area of residence and poor health is also strong, with data showing that those who live in the most deprived areas have significantly higher rates of heart disease than those who live in the most affluent areas. The Institute of Public Health has calculated on the basis of the CSO figures that I just mentioned that if we could eliminate socio-economic differentials in life expectancy in Ireland, we could add 13.5 million extra years this century to the lives of Irish people. Wouldn't that be something worth working towards? At a minimum, we must ensure that the situation does not get worse with the return of long-term unemployment, the reduction in our already low levels of social spending, and the impact on those on low incomes of the universal social charge. TASC is calling on government to put improved health and reduction in health inequalities at the heart of government policy. It's calling for an independent review of health inequalities in Ireland to identify the most effective and evidence-based strategies for reducing health inequalities and to lay the foundation for a new national public health policy. This has been done in other countries, so we're not calling for anything. It's not as radical as it might sound. It recommends that the Minister and Department of Health take a lead role in policy to improve health and reduce health inequalities. There needs to be a Cabinet subcommittee to bring all those policies, the leaders of the different policy areas together to provide leadership. Okay, I should speed up. And when calling for a number of other institutional changes to really put reduction of health inequalities at the heart of government policy. We want to see an equality statement published with every budget to explain how decisions on public expenditure and taxation are being informed by equality and the distributional impact of those decisions. In conclusion, I'd just like to say again that it is a really very exciting time for health policy. It's a time to put in place a health system worthy of the aspirations of this republic, a health system designed on the social democratic principles, on the values of universality, equity and solidarity, not based on the confusing mixture of statutory entitlements, charity and market forces that has characterised our health system in the recent past. Changing the way in which the health system is funded and access to medical care is organised is not going to be easy. There is going to be opposition from those disadvantaged by UHI. And the intentions of UHI may be undermined, as were the principles of our tax-based system in the 1970s and 80s, by our own efforts. Skillful political leadership will be needed over a lengthy period to bring the changes proposed about. The government is right to begin with universal access to primary care. This reform promises the greatest gains in health, while at the same time much better use of resources within the health system. And it will be a good demonstration project for the more complex introduction of hospital insurance. But UHI, while welcome, is not enough. If the government is serious about health, it must put the reduction of health inequalities at the centre of government policy. The TASC report that I've mentioned provides the rationale for action and recommendations as to how inequality as a preventable cause of death and morbidity can be reduced. Thank you very much.